So we're going to go ahead and get started with this eFormation webinar, Dwelling Places for God. We're brought to you by the Lifelong Learning Department at Virginia Theological Seminary, which is home to eFormation, which helps ministry leaders navigate digital ministry, as we've all been having to do throughout the pandemic, even if we hadn't wanted to. Now here we are. And Building Faith, which is a really incredible, rich resource for faith formation resources for congregations, families. There's a lot of great seasonal stuff that's coming up now there for Epiphany. So happy Epiphany, everybody. So lots of great Epiphany resources as well as you make your way through this season. Oh, well, I clicked the link. There we go. So let's begin with a prayer. And I've recently discovered this great prayer book by Terry Stokes called Prayers for the People, Things We Didn't Know We Could Say to God. And he's on Instagram at Prayers by Terry, I think is, if you look for him there. And he's got this great compendium of prayers he's put together. And this is a prayer that he wrote for creative work. He kind of mixes some King James, some pop culture. There's a prayer in that book for when you go into Target to try not to buy too many things you don't need when you go in. So he's done a kind of a great job of mixing these different styles. So this is a little more the traditional, but a really good one for creative work. So let us pray. O Holy Maker, who brings order and beauty out of chaos, ignite a spark of creativity in our hearts, minds, and bodies as we seek to make something out of nothing. Spirit, let the breath of thy inspiration touch us, fill us, and move us. Govern our trial and error, our stabs in the dark, our striking out into the void, and the slow crystallization of our ideas. Let what we create be accessible and enlightening to others and glorifying to thee. We thank thee for making us co-creators with the Holy Trinity. Amen. So would love for you to meet our presenters. Let me introduce myself first. I'm Keith Anderson, and I'm the pastor at Upper Dublin Lutheran Church in Ambler, Pennsylvania, just outside of Philly. And I'm the Associate for Digital Content with the Lifelong Learning Department at VTS. And it's just my pleasure to have Kyle and Shamika here. We've been on this Dwelling Places with God journey for several months as we've been putting this resource together. So it's really great they can be with us here in the resource. So I'm going to invite you each to introduce yourselves because you will do it way better than I could. And Shamika, could you go first?
Absolutely. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation and lovely to see you all. So the rumors are true. I'm Shamika Klassen. I am currently a third-year doctoral student at the Information Science Department at CU Boulder, where I study technology, ethics, and social justice issues. I'm also the founder and head tech chaplain at the Tech Chaplain Institute, where we help people, we teach and train people on how to use their technology and replace fear and anxiety with empowerment there. I'm also a new member of the Learning Forte team, and so I'm excited about my journey with them as well. So happy to be here.
Thank you, Shamika. Kyle.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Kyle Oliver, and I am the Chief Product Officer at Learning Forte. We are a team that tries to help people embrace hybrid ministry with confidence through courses and coaching and consulting. And I'm also a doctoral student in the educational media program at Teachers College, which is the School of Education at Columbia University.
Great. You just each have just a few things going on in the world. So all the things, that's great. So for our time together, what we're going to do is, now we've introduced ourselves, we're going to break this time down and mainly into two sessions. And we want to give you a flavor of this resource that we've created that we're really excited about called Dwelling Places for God, that comes out of our eFormation program. So we're going to give you some video snippets of the resource. It's a really big and beautiful resource. So we're going to share some snippets with you to give you a flavor of the presenters and what they cover. And so we'll watch a video, and then we'll discuss it, ask Kyle and Shamika to respond, and then take your questions. And then we'll do another session that really focuses on how our presenters reflect on decentering and recentering and kind of this hybrid space that we're doing ministry in. again, discussion and questions. And then we're going to have a time to take you through this resource, the Dwelling Places for God resource. So what is Dwelling Places for God? Well, it's a new resource that we're offering through lifelong learning in a kind of a different way. Many of you may be used to building faith posts. You might be used to these webinars, but we've created a format for these presentations featuring three really incredible presenters. So Dr. Heidi Campbell from Texas A&M, who is really the scholar when it comes to digital ministry and digital religion. The Reverend Sam Wells from St. Martin's in the Field in London, previously at Duke University Chapel. So really incredible theologian. And Kim Jackson, who is an Episcopal priest and a Georgia State Senator. Each of them really inspiring in their own unique way. And we pose this question to them: where are you finding, or where are your faith communities finding dwelling places for God in the midst of this pandemic, in the midst of this new hybrid reality that we find ourselves in? And each of them, from their own research, from their own experience, from their own convictions and insights, have responded to this question, each in their own particular way. Heidi with her incredible research that she's been publishing even throughout the pandemic, Sam Wells with his theology of being with and sense of holding together communion and community, and Kim Jackson in the work that she does in the Georgia State Senate, as well as being the vicar at Common Ground in Atlanta, which is a ministry that serves people experiencing homelessness. So really incredible perspectives, incredible people kind of in conversation together and in conversation with us. And so we're going to give you a flavor of that. We're going to talk about that. We're going to take your questions, and then we're going to show you how to access that resource and what that looks like for you. Okay. Kyle and Shamika, do you have any other things that you'd like to say before we look at a first clip in terms of the project itself? Kyle has been our host. You'll see that he was the interviewer for all of these sessions, and Shamika was part of the panel that was engaging with each of the speakers. So I wonder if each of you have, if there's anything you would add at this point about the project and resource.
Go ahead, Kyle.
Well, as I think you'll see today, I think we were really struck by how much rich interplay there was across the three conversations. And so I'm glad that we're doing this session so we get a chance to engage with that explicitly. And I'm excited that that these sessions are available, as a bundle as well, so that you can engage them as a series and get to hear that interplay.
Absolutely. It was such a treasure and a joy to be able to listen to each of these different perspectives from where they're coming from, but they all had some themes and some patterns that sort of wove through what they were talking about. So I'm excited for other people to get to listen in on the conversations as well through this resource.
Great. Thank you. Okay. So we're going to watch our first clip, and we've got a few minutes from each speaker. And the first one is really hearing some of kind of their thesis, the kind of approach, the unique approach that each one of them is taking. So we're going to have a few minutes from Heidi Campbell, a few minutes from Sam Wells, and a few minutes from Kim Jackson to give you a flavor of how they're coming at this question of dwelling places for God.
Between religion, media, and digital culture. And I began that work in the 1990s when the internet was described as a library with all the books thrown on the floor. It was a wonderful world of email and news groups, and I started my research looking at how people were using that early internet technology to build Christian community online, and how those involvements in digital communities might change people's understanding of what it means to be the church. Over the last 25 years, I've looked at anything from the rise of religion and digital gaming to how people are using prayer apps to invigorate their spirituality, and more recently looking at how memes communicate different messages about religion. But today, in this theme of dwelling places for God, I want to look at kind of where has God been and where are we at in this season of the pandemic, or what I've called lessons from the pandemic for the future of the church. So over the last 18 months, it's been fun to watch how many of the people that I've seen as critics over the last several decades had to quickly change their tune as they were forced to move online. And this was not just a phenomenon noted by pastors, but a lot of articles appeared in news outlets. One of my favorite ones is from Wired magazine. That's titled "The Pandemic Nearly Shuttered My Church, but Technology Saved It." So people began to realize that the church had to innovate, it had to be creative, it had to do something new, not just because of the social distancing that was happening, but I would argue also because of some broader trends that were happening in culture. So I'm centering my kind of talk today about this question: what has the pandemic taught the church about using technology and its future? So this need to change and need to innovate is something that's been noted by scholars like myself who study media and religion. It's been noted by religious groups. It's been noted even by the news media. NPR had a story that came out and says things will never be the same again, how the pandemic has changed religion, and that there's no going back to a pre-pandemic reality. And I think this is important because it wasn't just the technology and the church's embrace of technology that is causing this to happen. It's also about that we're entering into an age before the pandemic that was causing us to change, but I don't think many churches noticed it. And I put it this important point, and this could be a whole talk within itself, but our post-pandemic reality will be a post-Christian reality. The church is facing many challenges at this point. There's very practical challenges, just as how is this technology forcing us to rethink our practices, our liturgy. This article from the National Catholic Reporter says, "Confession by Zoom, the pandemic revises conversations about reconciliation from afar." So over the last 25 years, I've seen lots of debates about online communion, online baptism, and the act of confession. What are the limits that technology poses to us, as well as the possibilities? And not just the practical challenges, but what are the theological challenges that pose us? In this other article about the pandemic may speed up change in the church, it says how within the Catholic context, the rise and the primacy of clericalism has been challenged by the digital transition, as well as authority issues emerging through the pandemic. So we're entering into a very complex era. And in that situation, I was trying to think like, well, how is one way I could sum up? I was asked to kind of say, where is God in the center of this? And I would say God is very much in the center. He is helping us kind of adapt, and he's helping us think more deeply about this era that we're living in. But we've seen tremendous change. Everything that could be shaken has been shaken, from our healthcare systems, politics, from relationships, from education. The pandemic has touched many areas of our life. And I would argue that what it's shown, especially through my research, that our previous way of doing church is not dead, is dead. We can't go back. We hear a lot of talk about the new normal, and that's not just a buzzword, it's actually a reality. And it's a reality that was being ushered in before the pandemic, but the pandemic has just kind of forced those who were kind of lagging to adopt technology and also begin to recognize the cultural shifts that we're amidst of. In John 12:24, it says, "Very truly, I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds."
Communion and community name the two aspirations of church. The one is about being in and bringing others into relationship with God. The other is about relating civilly, cordially, and sacrificially with one another, and attending to the things that need doing to function humanly. When Jesus talks of the kingdom of God, he's talking about this communion and community becoming a reality for all people. Fundamentally, communion and community are about ways the Holy Spirit forms bonds between us, God, and one another that we would otherwise not imagine possible. Something significant has happened in the last few months in relation to these things. In March 2020, we ceased to be able to experience communion and practice community in ways we'd assumed we always would. We discovered kinds of online interactions most of us had never known before And in many cases, we started personally or professionally connecting with groups of people online in a way and to an extent we'd never done before. At first, we saw this as a provisional measure to tide us over until we got back to new ways of relating. But we're starting to realize not only that the virus and its variants might be with us for a long time yet, but that online ways of connecting aren't just an interim make-do, they're here to stay. The secret of happiness is learning to love the things our Heavenly Father gives us in plenty and not setting our hearts on the things that are in short supply. The situation of being suffused with the things God gives in plenty and wanting nothing else is called heaven. We're full of complaint about death, disease, disruption, and distress. Why don't we take this moment to re-examine the heart of our faith, communion and community? If we do, we might see that what we're being offered is a deeper understanding of how the Holy Spirit creates connections that constitute communion, and a greater appreciation for the abundant ways to be community. It's common to say that the pandemic has been a long Lent, in which we've involuntarily given up the things central to our faith. I believe those things are communion and community. But if we take the remaining 7 dimensions of being with and change our mindset from lamenting loss to enjoying abundance, I suggest we can find ways to be with one another that will not only sustain us through the pandemic, but make us richer in communion and community when the pandemic is a distant memory.
But in a general sense, I'm curious, what is it like from a political candidate's perspective? What does the internet mean for Kim Jackson, a candidate for Georgia State Senate?
Yeah, well, I ran a campaign in the middle of a pandemic. So it was technology suddenly took over, and all the things that I actually love about campaigning were stripped away. So all that in-person interaction, the knocking on doors, the meet and greets in person, all of those went away. And here's what I became an expert at, Kyle. I became an expert at teaching older people, because those are the people who vote. I became an expert at teaching older people how to use Zoom. Like, we would do these meet and greets, and it was supposed to be an hour long, and it would inevitably just be like the first full 30 minutes of saying, like, let me call you on the phone so I can walk you through this. And, like, you need to turn it off mute. And like, it was just this whole thing of teaching people in their 60s and 70s how to use Zoom. And so many of them like thanked me for it, because then they in turn like were able to Zoom their grandchildren and their family members. And so I felt like I wasn't sure if I was actually campaigning. I just felt like I was teaching people how to use Zoom. But it mattered. I think it mattered a lot to those folks because it connected people. And then I think technology has also just been this huge wasteland of awfulness at the same time. It wouldn't be fair if I didn't acknowledge that. I think about, one of the lowest points in my race is when I was running as a campaign, was that I read the comments. Don't ever read the comments. I read the comments from an article that was, the headline of the article was some clickbait too, because it was like, lesbian priest seeks to become state senator, right? Not the greatest way to attract people who are going to be kind. And it was just a cesspool of hate and homophobia and terrible theology. And so, yeah, I think the internet, both as a candidate and now as an elected official, has been this place of both good and evil, a place where I've been able to connect with so many people, so many people in my district and throughout all of Georgia in positive ways. And then it's also been the space in which so many people from Georgia have been able to connect with me and tell me how awful they think I am because I'm gay or a Democrat or fill in the blank, and they don't actually know me, but that's how they choose to use the internet to attack me.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And so on a lighter note, but maybe sad, am I right in assuming you haven't actually gotten to kiss any babies?
You're right. I haven't gotten to kiss any babies because of stupid COVID. But it'll happen. It'll happen.
Zoom tech, online harassment, and no baby kissing. These are difficult times.
These are. I will say though, Kyle,
between religion, media, and
not good for the host to mute himself. Apologies for that. I wanted to just bring that part to a close and click the wrong spot, but wanted to just throw it to Kyle and Shamika for a little bit of, you were there live for those conversations, and what your kind of thoughts in hearing it again or reflecting on it again, some of the common themes and what you heard or what you've thought in the meantime. Shamika, would you like to go first?
Absolutely. So I think something that I heard both in Heidi and in Sam's comments were how in the midst of the pandemic, in the midst of the adoption of technology, in the midst of all of these challenges and changes that are happening, God is still there. Even though the way we've done things in the past has been challenged and shaken up, it's and that way is dead. That doesn't mean that all of the intention behind our liturgies and the importance of gathering as a community, whether it's on or offline, all of those things are still there. And then with Kim's comments, when she talked about how impactful it was for those older folks to learn how to use Zoom, I resonate with that immensely as a tech chaplain. And I've seen how powerful it can be for someone to figure out how to use something or be shown how to use something in a way that honors their humanity and brings dignity to that moment. So I thought that was incredible. And it made me think of how important digital literacy was before the pandemic and then how crucial it became during that time, and who takes on the mantle or the role of conveying that knowledge and that information to people. Oftentimes it gets saddled to the younger people in a family or the younger people in a faith community, whether or not that's fair. So I feel like as a tech chaplain, I want to encourage other folks who have that knowledge or who are interested in learning that knowledge to share it. And I think that's important as well.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of us on this webinar were relating to teaching people to use Zoom. That's felt like the first 4 months of the pandemic. Yeah. Go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, so what I got thinking about rewatching these videos was the sort of experience of a kind of disorientation that each of the speakers talk about, right? And I'm thinking in particular of Heidi's use of the idea of the sort of post-Christian reality and the challenges that are springing from that for how we conceive of and practice being church. I think of Sam's comment about this experience of a kind of long Lent and feeling separated in an especially poignant way from each other and from a kind of sacramental being together, and then Kim talking about this whole experience of having a campaign turned upside down, and everything that was great about campaigning all of a sudden was terrible. In each case, there's this strong sense of disorientation, and what I think is like the big opportunity for us, the kind of silver lining in the midst of all the terrible things happening around us, is that disorientation, I think, can help us to connect with the people that most need the gospel. That we the places in our lives where we're feeling disoriented and disconnected is where the church and community and connection can be a balm and can be that healing force in our lives. And so, I've been thinking a lot about this question of, what is it like for a newcomer to come to a online church service and try to understand what's even going on. But even before online church services, a newcomer coming to a church is always going to be a kind of disorienting experience. And to borrow Sam's language, we get to be with people experiencing that disorientation. And I wonder what changes to our usual habits, some of them may be bad habits, that kind of experience might bring up for us. So that's what I've been chewing on in getting to revisit these clips.
Yeah, thanks for that. In my mind, the next set of clips that we're going to move to, and please, everybody, keep your questions and comments coming, because we're going to because some of the comments or questions I think are going to be really poignant for the next set of clips. But this next set I've had in my mind as a you were talking about kind of disorientation and maybe even some hope of a reorientation. And this one, this next set is kind of more of like a decentering and a recentering is how I've kind of heard some of what they were, what does authority look like when it's spread out? What does the center look like when people are all on a Zoom together or online? So when the building is not the central place, at the moment anyway. So let's move to that next set. Again, we're going to hear a short clip from each person from in the same order: Heidi Campbell, Sam Wells, and Kim Jackson, and we'll kind of reflect on that, and we'll take your questions and comments. So move this along. So kind of on the theme of recentering and decentering and recentering in these digital spaces.
So I'm curious from your perspective, if you had to sort of wonder about what this decentralizing force is going to mean for religious leaders, what are some of the things you would want those leaders to be thinking about?
Well, I think, one thing is just, how a lot of people, when they define community only happens when people physically get together in a specific space at a specific time. And they don't think of as people that chatting in a chat room actually as being community. They don't think about how, people maybe kind of, volunteering at a soup pantry that's not run by the church. That actually too is an expression of community. That community is not just about physical presence. It's about common vision. It's about sharing and living out the gospel, as well as kind of studying and reflecting on it. And I think, there's always been, we're either outreach focused, and that's when we're community externally, and then when we're in the building, we're internally community. But many of us know you can be in a church, you can be surrounded by people and still be disconnected from them. So the idea, just because you have physical presence doesn't mean you have community. And I think that was one of the key arguments that many pastors began to realize, wow, just like I use social media doesn't mean I create a social experience, but just because people are in a building doesn't mean I've actually built a community either. And I think, that kind of deeper reflection about, how do we kind of be a community that's both inward and outward? And, what kind of activities can we do that are both mediated by technology as well as physical, that may be outside our normal kind of cookie cutter of what it means to be a community? When I vacation Bible school as a kid, I learned this song, and it says, the church is not a building, the church is not a steeple, the church is not the pews, the church is the people. And most pastors would say, yeah, the church is the people, but what are the people doing, and what are the people standing for? It's not just the people gathered in one space. It's they're called to do and to be, and really be in relationship with one another. And I think digital media is great in facilitating that. So thinking about, mediated community shouldn't be problematic. It shouldn't be the only thing.
I think I'll start with a general comment and then give two illustrations. So the general comment is that our mission statement as a church is at the heart, on the edge. And that leads to a lot of discussions about centering. So when you use the language of inclusion, there can be a patronizing element that assumes that the person speaking is in the center and you're reaching out to people on the edge. And however much you try to avoid that, if you've got a physical building, then standing in the center of that physical building feels like being at the heart, and not being in that building feels like being on the edge. So you've got a kind of a problem. Now, the pandemic has taken that away because if you think of our Heart Edge network, for example, which is now on 4 continents, broad church renewal movement covering commerce, culture, compassion, and congregational life. In the past, there was an event which I often spoke at or somebody spoke at, and people came to a church or community center to engage with. It's exploded online in the last 18 months, so that we do most of our events now like we're doing this right now, where the center ceases to be a meaningful notion, provided you've got the kit and you know how to use it to get online. You're as much the center as anybody else. So that, that's my overview statement about the fact that it's in some ways enabled us to fulfill our mission more than we did in normal times.
Start by sort of telling us the story of Church of the Common Ground. How'd you come to be involved? Tell us a bit more about the congregation and your work there.
Yeah, thanks so much for asking. I often have conversations when people are much more interested in the state Senate side, even though I've been a priest for my entire adult life, basically, and so much more comfortable talking about that vocation. I serve the Church of the Common Ground, which is a church without walls. We have no building. I would say 90% of our congregants sleep outside, and the remaining 10% have been impacted by homelessness. They may be in a shelter now, or they may have even gotten permanent housing, but they know that experience. Common Ground started long before me. There were 2 priests who came down from Boston after having had an experience with a similar type of ministry in Boston. And when they arrived in Atlanta, they said, we need to do this here. And it started really kind of as a pop-up Eucharist. I don't think they had that language back then, but that's really what it was a kind of pop-up Eucharist in front of Atlanta's largest homelessness shelter at the time. And so they would come down every Sunday and pop up and have Eucharist and then kind of go back. And eventually it became a church, a true community, where they moved from just doing these pop-up Eucharists to really developing relationships and building community and building out an entire week's worth of programming. So that's what I've been able to inherit. So the pandemic now has lasted much longer than I think any of us imagined, right? But I remember in those first weeks when the city of Atlanta went on lockdown, so it used to be said that if you're homeless in Atlanta, if you don't have a place to stay in Atlanta, the one thing we can promise you is that you'll never go hungry, because there are always people who are out in the parks giving away food. Well, that did not continue when we went on lockdown, right? People of goodwill followed instructions and they stayed at home. And so I remember, very vividly coming one Sunday. We never stopped services. We were really clear about Sunday services will continue. They're outside, so that helped. We were masked and we used all those precautions. But I remember very vividly one Sunday arriving, and we always have 80 lunches available. And the line for people to receive lunches, there had to have been 120 people in that line. And someone said, yeah, there's no food. There's no food. Like, people are digging in trash cans. And I remember having this feeling of like, how is this going to work? I have 80 lunches. There are 120 people. Like, this is not going to work. And then I watched, that true loaves and fishes situation happen, right? Where people took these lunches, and these are folks who were really hungry, right? Who really hadn't had access to food, but they took their lunches and they divided them into parts, and they made sure that every single person had food to eat that day. And for me, I don't know that there's ever a more holy moment that I will experience than watching people who have so little share what they have with other people. And so that went on for several weeks, where we really were having to, we of course added the lunches that we provided. And but then over time, people started coming back around food. But I think one of the big things that the pandemic and one of the big ways that it had impact on our folks was that suddenly there was a flood of money coming into the city to try to get people housed. And so we watched some of our long-term sleeping outside for 10 years members suddenly get housing. And it was amazing. And it also made me ask all these questions of like, how did this happen so quickly? And if it could happen this quickly, why didn't it happen quickly before a pandemic, right? But that, I think, has been one of the great miracles
All the excuse the editing. That's on me. But as Kim was saying, one of the great miracles of the pandemic was seeing those things happen. Kyle and Shamika, I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts. Thanks, T. I'm excused. I appreciate it. Video editing is not my specialty. But Kyle, maybe you could go first this time, and love to hear your thoughts in hearing this again.
Yeah, I mean, I like what you said, Keith, about the themes here being about like sort of decentering and recentering. I mean, I really fixated a little bit on what Heidi said about community is about having a common vision, I think, and to go back to what you said earlier about heading into this sort of like post-Christian era. I think there's really good questions about like, how do we have a common vision in this time where, those of us who are used to, taking some common frameworks for granted can no longer do that, right? And, she named, people need, we do that through doing, and we do that through being. And then as I listened to Kim speaking, I thought of, just some of the like practices of doing and then of being together that are manifest in her context, right? And the most powerful ones, I think, being like sharing food, and then sharing. I don't know if she used the word stories, but that's always where my brain goes. But sharing that like interpersonal life together stuff that helps us to have relationships. So, I mean, as Christian people, especially maybe sacramental Christian people who are kind of centered on this sharing and receiving, kind of Eucharistic vision of life and the world, I think some of what I'm hearing as challenge in these conversations is to think about how do we maybe remix those practices of sharing and receiving, for these like disoriented times, for this post-Christian time, for these, online connections that we either embrace or are forced into. And the thing that I like am always coming back to when it comes to sharing and receiving is this really important insight, I think, from Henry Jenkins, who's a communication scholar, studies digital communities. And, he says to have a community, everyone has to feel empowered to share, and everyone has to trust that what they share will be received. And so as we think about decentering and recentering experiences of community in the midst of everything we're going through right now, like how can we be attentive to this rhythm of sharing and receiving, even if that doesn't necessarily mean sharing and receiving a wafer on Sundays like we've gotten so accustomed to. So that's where I went with some of these clips.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. Shamika, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I really appreciated what Heidi said. I'm echoing what Kyle sort of lifted or brought into relief about community being not a physical presence, but a common vision. And I also appreciated that Heidi specifically said, just because you have physical presence doesn't mean you have community. And then also, just because you post something on social media doesn't mean you're creating or cultivating a social experience. So I think that there was, during the early days of the pandemic, people were rushing to figure out how to respond, and there was a learning curve, and there was, back orders, and it was a lot going on and a lot happening. But one of the things that has come out of maybe the second, third, fourth phase of that were the theological questions of how do we cultivate social experiences in the digital space or virtually, and how do we engage with the digital space and our sacraments, or what do we do with new people who find us digitally, as Kyle was saying earlier, as being a newcomer to a faith community online, being disoriented, whether you're online or offline, but each space has its own sort of unique challenges. And then also with Sam's comments about inclusion being somewhat patronizing because it assumes you're the center of the situation and you're bringing people in to where you already are. And that was something that I thought was quite novel. And how he mentioned that after the pandemic, when they went online, that you are the center as much as anyone else is. So it's sort of this democratizing space, which is a lot of the early days of the internet. People were excited about that aspect of the internet being democratizing. And then Kim's story is just so incredible. I mean, the loaves and fish moment that she experienced was just so touching. And while we are advocates of technology and we want people to learn technology, that doesn't mean to exclusion of the physical space, right? There is a balance that can be struck. And I think that what's important is that one doesn't overweigh the other and that people feel comfortable in both places in their context.
Thanks. Shamika, I'm going to pose a question. Kristen raised a question a little earlier that's right in your Tech Chaplain wheelhouse. She said, how can we make sure we keep those who would be marginalized from the tech world connected? What is our role and how can we go out and bring those who are not comfortable or able to access technology? So, that's really the work that you do.
It is. And I think as I've worked with people who do have that fear and anxiety around technology, it stems from a couple different places. People might think they're just not familiar with it. They don't have a lot of experience with it. So it's an unknown, right? And so people can be very afraid of the unknown. And so if that's the situation, then it's a matter of orienting people around it, giving them opportunities to explore and play and practice on their own in a way that's comfortable for them. There's also issues around thinking that people might break something or that they might identify personally as, oh, I'm not a tech person, or don't give it to me, I'll just break it, or this kind of thinking, right? So then you have to address that aspect of their characteristics that they think of for themselves. But either way, however you address it, it starts with them. It starts with understanding where they're coming from and what their qualms are about the technology. So you can't just go in with technological expertise and expect that just, vomiting that on them is going to solve the issue. But instead, you want to start with the person, and that human-centered approach is what we use as Tech Chaplain. Someone asked in the comments who had missed my introduction what the Tech Chaplain is or what they do, and that's essentially what it is we practice this ministry of presence, and we use the best practices of chaplaincy and pastoral care to teach and train people how to use technology. But we don't start with the tech. We always ask who people are, who their community is, what their mission and vision statements are, and where they want to go with their technology, what their goals are, and what they're looking to do. So I think for this question, when you're wanting to bring those marginalized people to the center when it comes to technology, it's getting to know them and what their hangups are and addressing those specifically. And that's one of the best ways you can start that process.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We do want to share. So we've given you a little flavor of these recordings, and you, if you dive into these, you'll see Kyle and Shamika there as well, posing really good questions and helping to host that conversation. So Teachable is kind of a new platform that we're using at Lifelong Learning to make more resources available. And so I want to kind of share that with you now, but each of these 3 talks is available on Teachable as a class, or you can get sort of the all 3 courses. And I'm just going to click on to Teachable and just kind of orient you a little bit to show you. I've been in the learning process of it myself. So just to show you kind of what you could expect and what that looks like. So this is our Lifelong Learning at VTS Teachable page. And if you scroll down, what you're going to see there is the available courses that we've put together that you can dip into. Some of you may have participated in the symposium on spirituality of children, or attended a webinar of the Faith in the Future conversations, or maybe you got to one, but not all of them. So we've put these together, our Advent planning workshop. So we've put these classes together so that they're all in one place, they're accessible, and there are wraparound resources that go along with the recordings and the talks and so forth. So just by way of example, with Heidi, I'll click her class. And so like I said, they're separate, Heidi, Sam, and Kim. So if one speaks to you more than the others, you might do that, or you could get all three of them and the price is discounted with that bundle. But there's a little bit about what to expect in the course, about kind of what it's about, what you've heard about our presenter. And then you'll see what the course curriculum looks like. So what we took was we took these presentations that each person did, and we broke them down into manageable kind of sections along a theme, and we've put together the slides, discussion questions. So this is a resource that you can use with a church staff, with a clergy group, with an adult forum or adult education setting. I've had people sort of sample this and say, I want to take this to my rector. He needs to hear this. That was the presentation by Heidi. So there are many ways to engage with it, but it's designed so that you could certainly watch it yourself, but you can also engage with your congregation or leadership team or colleagues around some of these things and draws those out. So our team at Lifelong Learning put all of this structure and all these resources together to go around it. So you'll see then that each of these sections has a breakdown. It has the slides. It has discussion questions that are ready for you. And then the way that we've done the pricing is this: if you're just an individual, it's $15 to access it. But if you want to do groups, the prices go by the number of people who would register. So if you had a group of 10 people you wanted to engage with, you could do the $99 version, and then you're going to get 10 registration codes. So you can give those out to your group, and then it goes from 10 to 25 to 60. So depending on your need, if you're just individually curious, if you want to share it with the team, at whatever kind of level that you're working with, whether that's in person or digital or hybrid, you can do that and have access to the entire class at any time after that and all the resources. So we have that for Heidi, for Sam, and for Kim as well. We're really excited about it. The presentations, hopefully you just got a sense that the presentations were amazing and so helpful in terms of, we've been kind of doing what we've been doing for the last 18 months or more now, right, with the pandemic, and just having to do the things that we've needed to do the ministry. And this is really an opportunity with people who are experts in these areas to zoom back a little bit and say, what are the themes here? What are the trends? What does this say about who we are as people of faith, as communities of faith, and how can we engage with that? I know if you're on this webinar, you've already been engaged with those questions, but these resources, I think, can help you engage a larger group of people in your congregation or your setting around these questions without having to be the person that has to present it, or sometimes say the hard thing. Let Heidi say the hard thing. And then you can react to it with everybody else. So we hope you'll enjoy these and dig into those, and we'd love to hear your stories about using it. So I'm gonna just stop my share, and we're gonna wrap up. But any thoughts, final thoughts? I guess Kyle and Shamika, we've sort of been on this journey for a little while now, and we're kind of helping to put this thing out into the world. Any closing thoughts as we wrap up?
I can start. I was just so grateful to be able to be sort of like a fly on the wall in these conversations and get to throw in a question here or there. I did also want to flag a resource from Heidi Campbell. There was a report that came out of some work that she did. I just put a link in the chat for the techinchurches.org reports that outline the insights and findings that they had looking at a group of churches, I believe in Indiana, and their time during the pandemic engaging with technology. So there's some really interesting things happening there. But all of the speakers had great tidbits and jewels of wisdom to share during their conversations. And so I'm hoping that anyone who's able to gets the opportunity to listen to these talks and share them with whoever they feel might be able to benefit from them.
Yeah, I was going in a similar direction. I think all three conversations were so rich in their own ways, but in particular, if you feel like you've been struggling in these days, it's really powerful to read Heidi's research and know that you are not alone. That many of the challenges that can feel so distinctive to our particular settings and the idiosyncrasies of staff and family life and all of that stuff. I've read that report and listened to so much of what Heidi had to share and thought that I just felt really seen and thought we are all in this together, and I think it makes a difference for how we engage with these problems when we can say to ourselves, this is not something to do with me as a leader or my community as a community. This is to do with this huge tumult that we've been thrown into together. And we can handle that in a different way, I think, knowing that we genuinely are in it together.
Yeah. Thank you, Kyle. The great words to end on. And as always, we're here as a resource, the Lifelong Learning Department at VTS and eFormation. We are a resource to the church as well. So in addition to this resource that we're making available and the other resources that you'll find on our Teachable page, if there are other ways that we can support you in your work and ministry, we're here for it, because we are on this road together. So Kyle and Shamika, thank you so much. They're not here, but thanks to our presenters, thanks to Heidi and Sam and Kim for really incredible, soulful, thought-provoking presentations. And thanks to all of you who have been here with us on the webinar. Thanks for your ministries and all the places where you're joining us from. We are grateful for you. We are praying for you in your work and your ministry. And if there are ways that we can support that, just let us know. All right. Okay. Peace, everyone.